Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to imagine, just for a second, the ultimate political paradox. Imagine being a colonized subject in the 19th century, watching your nation's wealth be systematically extracted by the largest, most powerful empire on Earth. So how do you fight back? Do you start a violent rebellion? Or do you do the unthinkable? Do you pack your bags, move to the absolute heart of that empire, and successfully infiltrate its highest legislative body to change the system from the inside? Well, today we're exploring the astounding legacy of Dadabhai Naoroji, a man who did exactly that. Just 5. In the 1892 British parliamentary elections, out of the thousands of ballots cast in the London constituency of Central Finsbury, Dadabhai Naoroji won his seat by a razor-thin margin of exactly 5 votes. It was a victory that literally sent shockwaves through the entire Victorian political establishment. And he pulled this off despite facing, honestly, just fierce, open hostility. I mean, just a few years earlier, the sitting British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury publicly attempted to dismiss Naoroji's political ambitions entirely. He used brutally prejudiced language, stating he doubted a British constituency would ever elect a quote-unquote black man. But Naoroji? He didn't let this systemic racism defeat him. Not at all. Instead, he used the immense public backlash against the Prime Minister's comments to drum up sympathy from British progressives. When he finally won, taking his seat in Westminster in 1892, he playfully embraced the punny nickname Mr. Narrow Majority. It became this triumphant badge of honor for the very first Asian to sit in the House of Commons. Okay, let's dive into this incredible 91-year journey. We're going to trace his life through 5 quick chapters. The Grand Old Man, from Bombay to London, the Drain of Wealth, the first Asian MP, and finally, demand for Swaraj. Chapter 1. The Grand Old Man and His Origins in Bombay. Before he became known as the Grand Old Man of India, Dadabhai Naoroji was simply a boy born in 1825 into a modest family in the bustling, rapidly growing port city of Bombay. He was part of a Parsi Zoroastrian family with a long priestly lineage. Now, his father actually passed away when he was just 4, but his widowed mother fiercely prioritized his education. He was raised with this core Zoroastrian philosophy of good thoughts, good words, good deeds. And that moral foundation, it totally propelled him to brilliant academic heights, eventually making him the very first Indian appointed as a professor at the prestigious Elphinstone College. Chapter 2. From Bombay to London, a really bold transition. So in 1855, at the age of 29, Naoroji makes a pivot that would quite literally change the course of Indian history. He left his comfortable academic life in Bombay for the smoggy streets of Victorian London, and his ascent was rapid. He wasn't just moving to England to visit, he went there as a partner in Kama & Co., establishing the very first Indian commercial firm in the United Kingdom. His goal was to understand the true, everyday mechanics of British imperial power. But here is where you really see that Parsi upbringing shine through. See, Kama & Co. was involved in the highly profitable trade of opium and alcohol. Viewing these commodities as socially destructive, Naoroji's deep moral compass just simply wouldn't allow him to participate. So what did he do? He resigned from the partnership purely on ethical grounds and eventually started his own cotton trading firm. He proved right there that you could absolutely be a successful merchant in the heart of the empire without compromising your ethics. Moving on to Chapter 3, The Drain of Wealth, his absolute masterclass in economic critique. This is exactly where Naoroji transforms from an ethical merchant into a revolutionary economic thinker. He realized the primary battleground against imperialism wasn't just moral, it was mathematical. He formulated the drain theory, completely dismantling the British narrative that their rule was somehow bringing progress to India. Using their own empirical data, their tax records, their administrative ledgers, he mathematically proved that colonial policy was systematically designed to extract wealth from India and pump it directly into Britain. So, how exactly did this happen? Well, Naoroji mapped out the specific mechanisms of this drain. Indian taxpayers were footing the bill for the India office, which was located all the way over in London. They were paying the incredibly generous pensions of retired British officials who had already moved back to England, plus they were funding British military expeditions. A staggering, just massive portion of India's revenue was simply leaving the country entirely, never to be reinvested in Indian agriculture, local industry, or public welfare. And this translated into a pretty stark geopolitical reality. Naoroji pointed out a devastating contrast. The rapid industrialization, the grand architecture, the insane accumulation of wealth in Victorian Britain, all of it was being directly funded by the deindustrialization, systemic poverty, and severe, recurring famines back in India.
It wasn't an accident. It was an intentional transfer of prosperity. He actually captured this reality in just a hauntingly brilliant metaphor. He wrote that British rule was like a knife of sugar. On the surface, the British spoke of law, order, civilization. It was smooth and sweet. But underneath, the economic extraction was completely lethal. It was still a knife, bleeding the Indian economy dry. To back up that metaphor, he brought the receipts. He calculated that between 1814 and 1845 alone, 350 million pounds sterling was drained from India to England. And to put that into perspective, this wasn't just a number on a page. That money represented millions of starved citizens, stunted local industries, and fundamentally, a nation's stolen potential. Chapter 4. The First Asian MP. Taking the fight directly inside. Armed with this devastating economic critique, Naoroji realized he needed a much bigger platform. He needed to take the fight directly to the very room where these colonial policies were being drafted. But his journey to Westminster wasn't exactly smooth sailing. In 1886, he ran as a Liberal candidate in Holborn and suffered a really harsh defeat. But he absolutely didn't give up. He spent the next several years relentlessly networking, building these incredible alliances with British Liberals, socialists, feminists, and Irish nationalists, basically anyone who understood the deep inequalities of imperialism.
And you know what? His relentless constitutional agitation finally paid off. In July of 1892, he stood for election again, this time in central Finsbury. Through sheer persistence and a really smart coalition of working-class British voters and progressives, he finally broke through, officially becoming the first Indian member of Parliament. And when it came time to actually take his seat, he made a groundbreaking decision. Refusing to take his parliamentary oath on the Bible, he was permitted to swear his oath on his own Zoroastrian holy book, the Corde Avesta. Right from day one, he proudly asserted his own identity, all while using the British political system to fight for the rights of Indians, for Irish home rule, and even for the welfare of local British laborers. Which brings us to our final chapter, 5, Demand for Swaraj, or Absolute Self-Government. As Naoroji aged, he grew increasingly and understandably frustrated with the incredibly slow pace of British reform. So, in 1906, at the age of 80, he was called upon to preside over the Indian National Congress in Kolkata. At the time, the movement was fracturing. You had moderates wanting gentle reform on one side and extremists demanding radical action on the other. Naoroji stepped up to the podium and united them all by publicly evolving his moderate stance into a radical new demand, Swaraj, absolute self-government. He argued that the only real remedy to the economic drain was for Indians to govern themselves. Period. To a really diverse and sometimes divided nation, he offered a profound rallying cry. He declared, "I am a Hindu, a Muslim, a Parsi, but above all, an Indian first." He proved right there that true nationalism transcended religious and regional lines, giving the freedom movement a deeply unifying, emotional, and secular bedrock. The domino effect of his life's work here was just immense. He actively mentored the next generation of freedom fighters, including a young Mahatma Gandhi and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. By shifting the Congress's goal to Swaraj, he fundamentally transitioned the struggle from polite petitions to massive mass movements. Ultimately, his drain theory laid the undeniable intellectual foundation that would culminate in India's independence in 1947. Even his own granddaughters went on to suffer imprisonment fighting for the exact freedom he envisioned. Dadabhai Naoroji literally spent a lifetime using the oppressor's own tools, their data, their language, and their very parliament, to dismantle their empire. He taught us that systemic exploitation absolutely must be answered with systemic, undeniable facts. So as we look around at the immense inequalities that still exist today between developing nations and the global north, I want to leave you with this to consider. How does the legacy of that drain of wealth echo in the power dynamics of today's global economy? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.